Hey you, do you want some code?
Welcome back. Let's talk about interpreters and compilers, which are important components in our JavaScript engine. In programming, there are generally two ways of translating code into machine language, or something that our computers can understand. What we are going to discuss here applies to most programming languages, not only JavaScript. Python, Java, C++, any language you can think of will use some of these concepts. So it's very important. Let's start with the first one, the interpreter. With an interpreter, we translate and read the files line by line on the fly. Let's take a look at how this works. I have a piece of code here that doesn't do much, does it? I have a function that performs a calculation, and we just loop over this calculation, which is 5 plus 4. And we do that 1,000 times. That's a long time. And you can see that we get a result of 9. But the loop keeps happening over and over. So, if I add console log here, do you see that? Yeah, this is looping repeatedly. Now, with an interpreter, if I give this file to an interpreter, the translation happens line by line on the fly. And this is how you expect the code to be executed, right? The interpreter sees the first line, then the second line, and then the third line, and says, all right, this is a function, and then it goes to the next part and says, all right, I should loop over this a bunch of times. And it starts doing some calculations. It's going to see, all right, that's what the function is. I'm going to run 5 plus 4 and then I'm looping again. So I'm going to run some calculations again. 5 plus 4, some calculations, 5 plus 4. And it keeps running. And this is how you might think code should be run, right? Because interpreting code simply means taking a set of instructions like we have over here and returning an answer and doing something with the code. It's just like me telling the computer to do this, then to do that, then to do this. And initially, that's how JavaScript worked. It is interpreting using an interpreter, which makes sense. Alright, but what about the compiler? What's the deal with a compiler? Well, a compiler, unlike an interpreter, doesn't translate on the fly. What it does is work ahead of time to create a translation of the code we've just written. And it compiles down to usually a language that can be understood by our machines. Let's take a closer look at this with the compiler. This time it will take one pass through the code and try to understand what the code does. It will take a program in JavaScript or any other programming language and write a new program in a desired language. Let's say a programming language called X. Well, this language that it produces, if we interpret it, running it one line at a time, it will create the same results as our previous language. So, the compiler tries to understand what we want to do and takes our language and changes it into something else. This usually happens into something called a lower level language, such as a machine code. Now, I know you're still a little bit confused. You see, the definition itself is a bit fuzzy in some respects. All languages have to be interpreted and compiled because they have to run. It has to be interpreted, and it also has to most likely be translated into something low level, like machine code, for example. We have a high level language here, like JavaScript, and we run a piece of code. An interpreter will take this code line by line and spit out bytecode like this that will execute this code for us. Alternatively, a compiler might take this code, go through it, and speed our machine code just like that, so that it can give it to CPU for the CPU to actually run the code. But remember how I said a program or most languages are both compiled and interpreted, because over here x86 code, which is machine code, is handed off to CPU and it needs to interpret these instructions. In reality, when it comes to x86, it is actually too slow to be interpreted literally. So instead, most modern CPUs will compile this x86 code into its own native microcode. As you can see, there are a lot of layers that happen on and on. But the main takeaways are this. There are two ways to run JavaScript. You can use an interpreter or a compiler. I know it's still a little bit fuzzy, but if I ask you, why would we want to do one over the another? What the pros and cons of each? What do you think? Why would you pick one over the other? In the next video we are going to explore that. I'll see you in that one. Bye bye.